On March 2nd of 2019, SpaceX launched their Crew Dragon capsule to orbit for the very first time, and this launch was a part of NASA's Commercial Crew Development Program. With this program, NASA is trying to help private companies send astronauts to the International Space Station. But why would NASA want to help other companies rather than just build the rockets themselves? And could this lead to a new era of space exploration? Let's talk about that. So why would NASA want to focus on helping private companies reach this goal rather than developing the rocket themselves? And in order to understand this question, we have to go back to the year 2011. In this year, the shuttle was actually coming to an end, and NASA was starting to focus on something called the Space Launch System, or SLS for short. And if you're not familiar with the SLS, it's basically their new rocket that they've been developing over the last 9 years, but it's on the level of the Apollo-sized rocket, or the Saturn V. So this thing is very massive and is going to be able to take us back to the moon. However, using an SLS just to go to low Earth orbit or to go to the International Space Station would be rather inefficient. Therefore, instead of NASA having to develop 2 new rockets, they decided to help or put the effort onto some private companies. But what made them think they would actually be able to do this? Now, before the Commercial Crew Development Program, NASA had actually worked previously with SpaceX on sending cargo to the International Space Station. In fact, one of the main reasons that SpaceX pushed the development of the Falcon 9 was to meet the criteria to be able to send cargo to the ISS. Therefore, NASA has helped SpaceX grow over the past decade. Ultimately, this Commercial Crew Development Program was somewhat as a second stage to the Commercial Resupply Program, which was going on in the late 2000s. So if it wasn't for SpaceX being successful then, we probably wouldn't even see this program existing. However, it has led to 2 companies standing out of the others, being SpaceX and Boeing. SpaceX having Crew Dragon, which as I mentioned previously recently launched, and Boeing having the Starliner, both of which are expected to launch astronauts to the International Space Station later this year. But before they can actually send astronauts, both of these companies have been going through a lot of rigorous testing with NASA and require 2 test flights before they do an actual mission. The first test flight, which SpaceX is currently doing right now, is focusing on just sending the crew capsule to the International Space Station without crew in it, seeing how well it can perform autonomously, docking with the International Space Station, and getting all the data about how well the life services were on board the mission. Then it will return back to Earth and they will do a lot more testing on how the vehicle recovered. Boeing is expected to use their Starliner in about a month or so when their test is going to occur. Afterwards, both SpaceX and Boeing tend to have their first crewed flights in around July or August of this year. Now, when these 2 crewed flights take place and are hopefully successful, it is going to be very exciting. For the first reason, it will end an 8-year drought of astronauts not being sent to the International Space Station on American soil. So whether it be SpaceX or Boeing that happen to complete this task first, they will end this drought. But it's also going to spark the beginning of a new era of space exploration. Now, you might be skeptical and say, why does this introduce a new era, or why is it so revolutionary? I mean, the technology as the most part is very similar to what was used in the past, and it's not like they're using some new innovative orbit or trajectory to get to the ISS. And you would be right in saying that. However, the new innovation comes from the fact that we're working with private companies. Let's look back on the Space Shuttle for a second. The overall mission design and concept and maintenance all came from NASA. Yes, they did subcontract a lot to different companies. However, when everything came together, it was NASA's vehicle. Space Shuttle usually equaled NASA. However, in this sense, it's kind of flipped over end. The Falcon 9 and the Crew Dragon are both developed by SpaceX. So at the end of the day, all NASA is really doing is checking to make sure SpaceX's vehicle is safe and purchasing a ticket to go to the International Space Station. Rather having to develop and maintenance and redesign a whole vehicle, they could just pay for this private company to do so. And in private industry, this usually leads to a lot more competition, which can lower the costs to get to space. So lower costs means we could see more satellites and more people going into space. Now, both Starliner and Crew Dragon are primarily going to be focusing on meeting NASA's criteria over the next couple years. Now, SpaceX has talked about going further to the moon and even Mars, and you can learn more in these videos, but Crew Dragon as a a whole is probably going to be staying in low Earth orbit. Now, it hasn't been announced for Boeing, but SpaceX has said that they might be eventually selling tickets to private customers for a tourist attraction of a sense orbit around the Earth, or maybe even a trip to the International Space Station, which has been done before with the Soyuz. However, this would be a new thing for private companies in the United States as a whole. Now, altogether, the rest of 2019 and hopefully the next few decades are going to be really exciting in seeing commercial crewed spaceflight, both coming from SpaceX, Boeing, and then possibly Blue Origin on the horizon, but we'll see what happens with that. But all that being said, I want to pose the question to you. In the next couple years, how frequently do you see these companies launching astronauts into space? Maybe something that happens 2 or 3 times a year, maybe even once a month or once every couple weeks? Let me know in the comments below. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.